You don't belong here." The words cut through the Christmas party like a knife as my son's wife stared at my grease-stained shirt with pure disgust. Chicago's elite had gone silent, all eyes on the 60-year-old Carpenter who dared to show up looking like he'd crawled out from under a car hood. What they didn't know was that 30 minutes earlier, I'd sacrificed my dignity to save a stranger's life in a blizzard. What they couldn't have imagined was that the elderly woman I'd helped fix her broken-down Mercedes was about to walk through those doors and expose every ugly truth about their perfect world. My name is Dawson Vance, and this is the story of how one act of kindness on the worst night of my life led to the most shocking revelation this wealthy family had ever faced. Before we dive deeper into this shocking story, make sure to subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from. Have you ever helped someone when it cost you something important? Let me know below because what happened next will blow your mind. My son Cole stepped forward, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Mom, maybe you should go home and change," he said quietly, unable to meet my eyes. The words hit me harder than any physical blow ever could. This was my own flesh and blood, the boy I'd raised after his mother died, asking me to leave because I looked like what I was, a working man who'd stopped to help someone in need. Grace crossed her arms, her perfectly manicured nails gleaming. "This is exactly why we don't usually invite him to family events," she said to Cole, as if I wasn't standing right there. "He has no sense of appropriate behavior. This is a charity gala for Chicago's most prominent families, not some backyard barbecue." The laughter that rippled through the crowd felt like needles in my chest. I thought about Sarah, my wife who'd been gone 3 years now, and how she would have handled this moment. She would have lifted her chin, smiled with grace, and reminded everyone that kindness matters more than appearances. But Sarah wasn't here, and I was drowning in a sea of silk and judgment. I had arrived 30 minutes late to this Gold Coast mansion, my hands still dirty from helping a stranded stranger fix her car in the worst snowstorm Chicago had seen in years. I'd sacrificed my own dignity to make sure an elderly woman wouldn't freeze to death on the side of the road. But looking around this room full of people who'd never gotten their hands dirty for anyone, I realized that my good deed meant nothing to them. In their world, appearance was everything, and I was living proof that you can't polish a working man's soul. "I should go," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the classical music playing in the background. The words tasted bitter in my mouth, like admitting defeat before the battle had even begun. But as I turned toward the door, something inside me rebelled. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every working person who'd ever been made to feel small by people who'd never built anything with their own hands. This was about the memory of my Sarah, who'd taught me that a person's worth isn't measured by their bank account or their zip code. I stopped walking and turned back to face the crowd. "You want to know why I look like this?" I asked, my voice growing stronger with each word. "Because I stopped to help someone who was stranded in the storm. Because I believe that helping people matters more than keeping your clothes clean. Because that's what decent human beings do." The room grew even quieter, if that was possible. Grace's eyes narrowed dangerously, and I could see Cole shrinking further into himself. But I was done being ashamed of who I was. Let me tell you how a carpenter from Southside Chicago ended up being humiliated at the fanciest Christmas party in Gold Coast, and how one act of kindness changed everything I thought I knew about worth, respect, and the true meaning of Christmas. 3 years ago, my world collapsed when Sarah lost her battle with heart disease. We'd been married 32 years, and she was everything I wasn't: graceful, educated, able to talk to anyone about anything. When the doctors said there was nothing more they could do, I held her hand in that sterile hospital room and promised I'd take care of our son Cole no matter what. Cole had always been the pride of our Southside neighborhood. While other kids were getting into trouble, he was studying to become a lawyer. Sarah and I worked double shifts, me building custom cabinets for wealthy clients, her cleaning office buildings at night to pay for his education. We never regretted a penny of it. Then Cole met Grace Sterling during his first year at a prestigious law firm. She was everything we weren't: old money, Gold Coast address, family name that opened doors we didn't even know existed. Their engagement photo in the Chicago Tribune showed them at some charity function, Grace in a dress that cost more than I made in a month. I tried to like her. I really did. But from the moment Grace stepped into our modest house in Bridgeport, I could see the judgment in her eyes. She smiled politely when I showed her the dining room table I'd handcrafted for Sarah's birthday, but her smile never reached her eyes. When I offered to build them a hope chest as a wedding gift, she declined with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "That's so thoughtful, Mr. Vance," she'd said. "But we're registered at places that match our aesthetic. The wedding was held at the Sterling family estate, a mansion that looked like something from a movie. I wore my only suit, the same one I'd worn to Sarah's funeral, and felt like a fraud among the hundreds of guests who seemed to know exactly which fork to use for each course. Grace's family was polite but distant, treating me like a necessary inconvenience rather than the father of the groom. I kept looking for Grace's grandmother, Helen, the woman Cole had described as the family matriarch. But Cole quietly explained that she was in the hospital, recovering from a serious illness that had kept her bedridden for months. She wanted to be here, he assured me, but the doctors wouldn't allow it. After the wedding, Cole and Grace moved to a penthouse in Gold Coast, and my visits became less frequent. When I did see them, conversations felt forced, like Cole was translating between two different languages, mine and theirs. Grace would ask about my little carpentry projects with the kind of condescension that made my teeth ache. The phone calls grew shorter. The visits became holidays only. I watched my son transform into someone I barely recognized, speaking in corporate jargon and wearing ties that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. But he was happy, or at least he seemed to be, and that's all a father really wants. So when Cole called last week with news that Grace's family wanted to include me in their annual Christmas charity gala, I was shocked. "Grace specifically asked me to invite you, Dad," he'd said, his voice carrying hope I hadn't heard in years. "She said it's time to make you feel more like part of the family." I should have known it was too good to be true. The morning of the Christmas gala, I stood in my bedroom mirror, adjusting Sarah's navy blue tie. My hands trembled not from age, but from nerves that felt like electricity under my skin. This was my shot at proving I belonged in my son's world. I'd prepared all week. Fresh haircut at Tony's barbershop, new shoes that pinched but looked respectable, and hours practicing small talk in front of the bathroom mirror. The weather forecast warned of snow, but I'd driven through worse Chicago storms. By noon, fat flakes were falling hard. I called Cole to confirm the party was still on. "Of course, Dad. Everyone's already here, including grandmother Helen. She's finally well enough to attend her first family event since her illness. This is huge." Helen, the family matriarch, I'd never met. Cole spoke of her with reverence, calling her the wisest person he knew. If I could win her over, maybe the rest would follow. I left Bridgeport at 5:30, giving myself extra time. The radio blared weather warnings, but I pressed on. This wasn't just about a party, it was about proving Dawson Vance deserved a place in his son's life. The storm worsened as I drove north toward Gold Coast. What should have been 30 minutes stretched to over an hour. My windshield wipers battled the snow while I leaned forward, squinting through the white curtain surrounding my old pickup truck. 3 times I considered turning back. The smart move would have been calling Cole with weather excuses. But later had a way of becoming never with Grace's family, and I couldn't give them another reason to dismiss me. My truck's heater wheezed, filling the cab with antifreeze smell and my own determination. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, thinking about Sarah's voice. "Kindness matters more than appearances, Dawson. Never forget that." The irony wasn't lost on me driving through a blizzard to impress people who judged everything by surface appearances. But sometimes you have to play by their rules before you can change the game. Traffic crawled along Lakeshore Drive. Expensive cars with better traction passed my struggling truck, their drivers probably heading to the same world I was trying to enter. I wondered if any of them would stop to help a stranger on a night like this. As I finally took the Gold Coast exit, my phone buzzed with a text from Cole. "Drive safe, Dad. Can't wait to introduce you to everyone." The weight of his expectations pressed down on me harder than the snow on my windshield. I had no idea that within the next hour, I'd face a choice between helping someone in need and arriving at that party looking perfect. I had no idea that choice would change everything. That's when I saw her, an elderly woman standing beside a broken-down Mercedes, snow accumulating on her silver hair. She wore an expensive coat but no hat, shivering in the brutal wind. I could have kept driving, but I couldn't leave someone stranded in weather that could kill. I pulled over. "Ma'am? Do you need help?" She turned toward me, revealing sharp blue eyes and dignified bearing despite her predicament. My car died. I was heading to St. Patrick's Church. "That's a long drive in this storm," I said, getting out. The freezing wind soaked through my dress coat immediately. "It's Christmas Eve," she explained. "My husband passed 5 years ago tonight. I go every year to light a candle for him." Her quiet grief hit me like a punch. "I understand. Lost my wife 3 years ago. The anniversaries are brutal." "Yes, they are. But we carry on." I examined her engine. Battery terminals corroded beyond belief. "Do you have any cola in your car?" She raised an eyebrow. I beg your pardon? Coca-Cola cleans battery corrosion. Old mechanic's trick. She retrieved a bottle from her purse, watching in amazement as I poured it over the terminals. In all my years, as I scraped away corrosion, we talked. She shared memories of her husband, an architect who loved old buildings. I told her about Sarah, how she'd made our small house feel like home. You're missing something important, she noted my formal attire. Christmas party with my son's family. First real invitation to their world. His wife's family moves in different circles than a Southside carpenter. Yet here you are, helping a stranger instead of protecting your appearance. I shrugged, wiping greasy hands on a rag. My Sarah said how we treat people when nobody's watching shows who we really are. Some things matter more than impressions. Try it now. The engine started immediately, her face lit with gratitude. I can't thank you enough. You've given me the gift of honoring my husband tonight. Just pay it forward, I replied. She pressed a business card into my hand, though I couldn't read it in the darkness. If you ever need anything, please call. We parted in the swirling snow, she toward the church, me toward a party where I'd arrived looking like I'd wrestled an engine. But I felt lighter than I had in months. Sometimes doing right is its own reward. I tucked the card in my pocket without looking at it, focused on the drive ahead. I had no idea our paths would cross again within the hour, or that this simple kindness would change everything. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd sacrificed my appearance to help someone reach a place of worship on the holiest night of the year. Sarah would have been proud. Now I just had to face the consequences at a party where appearance was everything. The Sterling mansion rose before me like something from a fairy tale, every window glowing with warm light against the dark Chicago sky. Valet attendants in crisp uniforms waited under a heated portico, their faces barely concealing surprise as my beat-up pickup truck pulled into a line of Mercedes, BMWs, and Teslas. I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror and winced. My hair was disheveled, my dress shirt had visible grease stains, and I smelled faintly of motor oil despite washing my hands at a gas station. This was exactly what I'd feared arriving at the most elegant party of my life, looking like I'd just crawled out from under a car hood. The young valet who took my keys tried to hide his confusion. "Welcome to the Sterling residence, sir," he said politely, though his eyes lingered on my stained clothing. Inside, the foyer took my breath away. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing light across marble floors so polished they looked like mirrors. Men in $1,000 tuxedos and women dripping in jewelry moved through rooms that could have housed my entire neighborhood. The air hummed with cultured conversation and the gentle clink of champagne glasses. I spotted Cole across the room, handsome in his tailored tuxedo, laughing at something Grace's father was saying. For a moment I felt a surge of pride. My son belonged here in a way I never would. He'd worked hard to earn his place in this world. Then Cole saw me. His smile faltered as he took in my appearance. I watched him excuse himself from his conversation and hurry toward me, his expression shifting from confusion to concern to something that looked dangerously close to embarrassment. "Dad," he said quietly, reaching my side, "what happened to you? You look like you've been in an accident." "I'm fine, son. Just stopped to help someone with car trouble." Grace appeared beside him, stunning in a silver dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. Her smile was perfectly practiced until she noticed my condition. Then her expression hardened into something cold and calculating. "Dawson," she said, her voice carrying just enough volume to draw attention from nearby guests. How unexpected. The conversations around us began to quiet as Chicago's elite took notice of the disheveled man who'd somehow made it past their velvet rope. I felt every stare, every raised eyebrow, every whispered comment behind manicured hands. "Maybe you should go home and change," Cole suggested, his voice barely above a whisper. "Come back when you're more presentable." The words hit me like a physical blow. My own son was asking me to leave because I looked like what I was, a working man who'd prioritized helping someone over maintaining appearances. Grace's eyes gleamed with something that might have been satisfaction. This was exactly what she'd been waiting for, proof that I didn't belong in their world. Grace stepped forward, her silver dress catching the chandelier light as she positioned herself where everyone could hear. Her voice carried the kind of authority that came from a lifetime of never being questioned. "Dawson, I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said, loud enough for half the room to hear. "This is a formal charity gala for Chicago's most prominent families, not a casual gathering." The whispers started immediately. I caught fragments. Who is that man? How did he get in? Absolutely inappropriate. Each comment felt like a needle in my chest. Grace's father, Richard Sterling, approached with the measured steps of a man accustomed to handling unpleasant situations. His tuxedo was immaculate, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expression politely cold. "Perhaps it would be best if you went home to freshen up," he suggested, though his tone made it clear this wasn't really a suggestion. "We completely understand. These weather conditions are treacherous." "Dad, please," Cole whispered beside me, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Just go home and change. Come back in an hour." But Grace wasn't finished. She moved closer, her voice dropping to what she probably thought was a discreet whisper, but was perfectly audible to everyone nearby. "This is exactly why we don't usually include him in family events," she said to Cole, as if I were invisible. "He has no sense of appropriate behavior. Look at him, he's dripping motor oil on our Persian rugs." The crowd had grown around us, Chicago's elite forming a circle like spectators at an accident. I caught sight of perfectly coiffed women shaking their heads in disapproval, men in expensive suits exchanging knowing glances. They were all thinking the same thing: this working-class man didn't belong in their world. "I stopped to help someone," I said quietly, finding my voice. An elderly woman was stranded in the storm. Grace's laugh was like breaking glass. "Of course you did. How very noble of you." The way she said noble made it sound like a character flaw. "But surely you understand that there are appropriate ways to handle such situations. You could have called the police or roadside assistance." "She needed help right then," I replied, my voice stronger now. "I couldn't just leave her there to freeze. And now you've ruined your clothes, embarrassed your son, and disrupted our entire evening," Grace continued, her voice rising with each word. "This is a $5,000 a plate charity dinner, Dawson. We have donors here who contribute millions to important causes. They don't need to see." She gestured at me with obvious disgust. The word hung in the air like a slap. Around us, the silence was deafening. I could feel Cole shrinking beside me, probably wishing he could disappear into the marble floor. My throat tightened with shame and anger. These people lived in a world where helping someone in need was less important than keeping your clothes clean, where a man's worth was measured by his appearance rather than his character. "You're right," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't belong here." I turned toward the door, my vision blurring with tears. I refused to let fall in front of these people. Sarah's voice echoed in my memory. "Hold your head high, Dawson. You're worth 10 of them." But right now, I felt worthless. Behind me, I heard Grace's satisfied voice. "Well, that's settled then." I was 3 steps from the door when it opened, and the woman I'd helped on the roadside walked in. The woman I'd helped on the roadside stood in the doorway, snowflakes still melting on her elegant coat. Her silver hair was perfectly styled now, and she carried herself with the kind of quiet authority that made the entire room take notice. Her sharp blue eyes swept across the scene, me standing defeated near the exit, Grace with her satisfied smirk, Cole looking mortified, and the crowd of elite spectators. "I apologize for my lateness," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. "The roads were treacherous tonight." Richard Sterling stepped forward, his demeanor immediately shifting to one of deference. "Mother, we weren't expecting you for another hour. Your driver called to say the weather was too dangerous." Mother. My heart stopped. This was Helen Sterling, Grace's grandmother, the family matriarch I'd never met because she'd been too ill to attend Cole's wedding. Helen's eyes found mine across the room, and I saw a flicker of recognition. But she said nothing about our encounter, instead moving gracefully into the room as guests parted before her like she was royalty. "What seems to be the commotion here?" she asked, though her tone suggested she'd heard enough from the doorway to understand exactly what was happening. Grace stepped forward eagerly, clearly ready to explain how she'd handled the situation with her usual efficiency. "Grandmother, Dawson, arrived in completely inappropriate condition," she began, gesturing toward me, with obvious distaste. "His clothes are filthy, he's dripping motor oil, and he's been disrupting the entire evening. I was just explaining that this isn't the appropriate venue for—" "Stop." Helen's single word cut through Grace's explanation like a blade. The room went dead silent. Helen walked toward me, her eyes never leaving my face. When she reached me, she spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "This man," she said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "stopped his vehicle in a blizzard tonight to help a stranded stranger. He sacrificed his own appearance at what he knew was an important family event to ensure that an elderly woman wouldn't freeze to death on the side of the road." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but Helen wasn't finished. "He used an ingenious solution to fix a dead battery, refused payment for his kindness, and wished the woman well before continuing on his way to join his family. He demonstrated exactly the kind of character and compassion that this family was built on. Grace's face had gone pale. Grandmother, how could you possibly know? Because I was that stranded woman. The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. I watched the shock ripple across every face in the room, Grace's mouth falling open, Richard's eyes widening, Cole's expression shifting from embarrassment to something that might have been pride. Helen turned to address the crowd, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard and obeyed. While you were all arriving in your warm cars, concerned only with your appearance and comfort, this man was demonstrating what Christmas is truly about, helping those in need, regardless of personal cost. She moved to stand beside me, her presence immediately changing the dynamic in the room. Dawson Vance embodies the values that matter most: kindness, selflessness, and genuine human decency. If anyone in this room has a problem with that, they can take it up with me. The silence that followed was profound. Chicago's elite, who moments before had been judging me with such certainty, now looked uncertain, uncomfortable, ashamed. Grace found her voice first, though it came out as barely a whisper. But grandmother, surely you understand that appearances matter. Helen's blue eyes fixed on her granddaughter with laser intensity. My dear child, let me tell you what truly matters. Helen walked to the grand fireplace, where a portrait of a distinguished man in his 60s hung above the mantel. The room followed her movement, captivated by her commanding presence. This is my late husband, William Sterling, she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. A wonderful man, a devoted father, and a high school mathematics teacher. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. Richard shifted uncomfortably. Mother, perhaps we should discuss this privately. No, Richard. It's time this family remembered its true history. Helen's voice cut through his protest. William was indeed a remarkable man, but he was not a businessman. He never built an empire, never made a corporate decision, never even balanced our household checkbook. The silence in the room was deafening. I built Sterling Properties, Helen continued calmly. Every building, every contract, every success came from my vision, my work, my decisions. I started with a $5,000 loan and a drafting table in our basement while William taught school and raised our children. Grace looked like she might faint. But grandmother, everyone knows that grandfather. Everyone knows what I allowed them to believe, Helen interrupted. In 1968, a woman-owned construction company faced impossible barriers. Suppliers wouldn't work with me. Banks wouldn't lend to me. Clients wouldn't take me seriously. So I let William be the public face while I did the actual work. She turned to face Dawson, her expression softening. For 50 years, I've watched this family forget where we came from. We've become exactly what I never wanted: people who judge others by their appearance rather than their character. People who've forgotten that real wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the lives you touch and the good you do. Richard found his voice, though it was strained. Mother, the company is successful because of sound business practices. The company is successful because it was built on the foundation of helping people, solving problems, and treating everyone with dignity, Helen replied sharply. Values that Dawson demonstrated tonight without a second thought. She walked back to where I stood, still stunned by these revelations. Dawson, when you stopped to help me tonight, you didn't see an elderly woman in an expensive car. You saw someone who needed help. You didn't calculate the cost to yourself or worry about what others might think. You simply did what was right. Her eyes swept across the room, taking in the faces of Chicago's elite. That is the kind of character that built this family's fortune. That is the kind of person who deserves respect, regardless of the grease on his shirt or the calluses on his hands. She turned back to me, and I saw something in her eyes that took my breath away, not just respect, but genuine admiration. Dawson, I have a proposition for you. Sterling Properties is embarking on a major historical restoration project, preserving some of Chicago's most important architectural treasures. We need someone who understands craftsmanship, someone who values doing things right over doing things fast. The room held its collective breath. I'd like to offer you the position of master craftsman, overseeing all restoration work. The salary is $120,000 annually, plus full benefits and a company vehicle. My knees nearly gave out. Around the room I could see jaws dropping, including Grace's. What do you say, Dawson? Ready to help me restore something truly beautiful? Helen walked to the grand fireplace, where a portrait of a distinguished man in his 60s hung above the mantel. The room followed her movement, captivated by her commanding presence. This is my late husband, William Sterling, she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. A wonderful man, a devoted father, and a high school mathematics teacher. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. Richard shifted uncomfortably. Mother, perhaps we should discuss this privately. No, Richard. It's time this family remembered its true history. Helen's voice cut through his protest. William was indeed a remarkable man, but he was not a businessman. He never built an empire, never made a corporate decision, never even balanced our household checkbook. The silence in the room was deafening. I built sterling properties, Helen continued calmly. Every building, every contract, every success came from my vision, my work, my decisions. I started with a $5,000 loan and a drafting table in our basement, while William taught school and raised our children. Grace looked like she might faint. But grandmother, everyone knows that grandfather, everyone knows what I allowed them to believe, Helen interrupted. In 1968, a woman-owned construction company faced impossible barriers. Suppliers wouldn't work with me. Banks wouldn't lend to me. Clients wouldn't take me seriously. So I let William be the public face while I did the actual work. She turned to face Dawson, her expression softening. For 50 years, I've watched this family forget where we came from. We've become exactly what I never wanted: people who judge others by their appearance rather than their character. People who've forgotten that real wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the lives you touch and the good you do. Richard found his voice, though it was strained. Mother, the company is successful because of sound business practices. The company is successful because it was built on the foundation of helping people, solving problems, and treating everyone with dignity, Helen replied sharply. Values that Dawson demonstrated tonight without a second thought. She walked back to where I stood, still stunned by these revelations. Dawson, when you stopped to help me tonight, you didn't see an elderly woman in an expensive car. You saw someone who needed help. You didn't calculate the cost to yourself or worry about what others might think. You simply did what was right. Her eyes swept across the room, taking in the faces of Chicago's elite. That is the kind of character that built this family's fortune. That is the kind of person who deserves respect, regardless of the grease on his shirt or the calluses on his hands. She turned back to me, and I saw something in her eyes that took my breath away, not just respect, but genuine admiration. Dawson, I have a proposition for you. Sterling Properties is embarking on a major historical restoration project, preserving some of Chicago's most important architectural treasures. We need someone who understands craftsmanship, someone who values doing things right over doing things fast. The room held its collective breath. I'd like to offer you the position of master craftsman, overseeing all restoration work. The salary is $120,000 annually, plus full benefits and a company vehicle. My knees nearly gave out. Around the room I could see jaws dropping, including Grace's. What do you say, Dawson? Ready to help me restore something truly beautiful? I stood there for a moment, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Helen was offering. 6 hours ago I'd been a lonely widower, worried about fitting in at a family party. Now, the most powerful woman in Chicago was offering me a chance to rebuild not just historic buildings, but my entire life. Mrs. Sterling, I began, my voice thick with emotion. I'm honored by your offer, but I need you to know I'm not taking this job because I need your charity. I'm taking it because I believe in what you're trying to restore. Helen smiled, the first genuinely warm expression I'd seen from anyone in this family besides Cole. I wouldn't expect anything less from you, Dawson. I turned to face the room full of people who judged me so harshly just minutes before. Many couldn't meet my eyes now, their champagne glasses suddenly fascinating. I accept, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The transformation in the room was immediate. People who'd been whispering about my appearance were now approaching with business cards and invitations. The same grease stains that had marked me as an outsider now somehow made me authentic, real, worthy of their attention. But I only cared about 3 reactions. Richard Sterling stepped forward, his face a mixture of shock and grudging respect. Dawson, I owe you an apology. I misjudged you completely. Cole appeared at my side, his eyes bright with tears and something that looked like pride. Dad, I'm so sorry. I should have stood up for you. I should have remembered what Mom taught us about what really matters. I pulled my son into a hug, feeling 3 years of distance melting away. You're learning, son. That's what counts. Grace stood frozen near the fireplace, her perfect composure finally cracking. Helen approached her granddaughter with the patience of someone who'd spent decades building things that lasted. Grace, dear, this isn't about punishment. It's about remembering who we really are. Dawson isn't taking anything away from you. He's giving you a chance to be part of something meaningful. As the evening wound down, Helen and I found ourselves alone on the mansion's terrace, looking out at the Chicago skyline. The snow had stopped, and the city sparkled like diamonds against black velvet. You know, Helen said quietly, when my car broke down tonight, I thought it was just bad luck. Now I realize it was exactly what we both needed. Sarah used to say that everything happens for a reason, I replied. I never believed her until tonight. Helen handed me a folder thick with architectural plans. These are the buildings we'll be saving, Dawson. Each one has a story, a soul that needs preserving. I can't think of anyone I'd rather trust with them. I flipped through the plans, seeing churches, theaters, and homes that had witnessed decades of Chicago history. This wasn't just a job, it was a calling. There's one more thing, Helen said with a mischievous smile. The company Christmas party next year? I think we should make it a potluck. Let people see what really matters. I laughed. The first genuine laugh I'd had in months. I'll bring my famous chili. Perfect. And Dawson? Next time you stop to help someone on the side of the road, don't worry about getting dirty. The best things in life usually require getting your hands a little messy. As I drove home that night in my beat-up pickup truck, I thought about Sarah and how proud she would have been. I'd lost a wife, but I'd found a purpose. I'd been humiliated by people who didn't matter, but defended by someone who did. Sometimes, the worst moments of our lives are just the beginning of our best chapters. Dawson's Christmas miracle shows us that God never abandons those who serve others selflessly. When we face our darkest moments of rejection and humiliation, the Lord is already preparing our vindication. Sometimes the Almighty uses our greatest trials to position us for our greatest triumphs. This powerful narrative joins countless betrayal stories that reveal how family can wound us deepest, yet also heal us most completely. Unlike typical betrayal stories that focus on revenge, Dawson's experience demonstrates the transformative power of forgiveness and grace. The most meaningful betrayal stories teach us that our response to injustice defines our character more than the injustice itself. Helen's intervention echoes the wisdom found in the greatest grandpa stories, those tales where experience recognizes virtue that youth overlooks. The most treasured grandpa stories aren't about material inheritance, but about passing down values that matter. Her defense of Dawson created one of those rare grandpa stories where moral courage bridges generational divides. Dawson's journey from carpenter to master craftsman reminds us that God honors those who honor others. When we choose service over self-preservation, when we extend kindness without expecting returns, we participate in divine work. Our smallest acts of compassion can become the foundation for our biggest breakthroughs. True success isn't about climbing social ladders, but about lifting others as we climb. Character revealed under pressure becomes the cornerstone of lasting achievement. Have you experienced moments when doing the right thing seemed to backfire, only to lead somewhere better? Share your story in the comments. Your experience might encourage someone facing their own difficult choice. Subscribe for more stories that celebrate the triumph of character over circumstance, and share this with anyone who needs reminding of their true worth.